Right.
Yes, sir.
Okay, it is actually 5:01. I call this meeting to order. This is the FedRAC meeting for the month of September 2022.
Recording in progress.
Oops. Okay. Do we have any public comments? No public comments?
May I have a sheet, one of the,
Like an agenda?
an agenda, please?
Agenda? Do we have a copy of the agenda?
Or somebody who's not on the committee could give
Coming
me
down
theirs.
your way.
Oh, thank you.
There you go. Thank you.
But I don't, am I on the committee?
You're on this committee.
I don't have an agenda.
Okay. So for the record, we do have a full council committee members here. Councilmember Lydia is joining us via Zoom.
Hi.
Hello.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
I was just gonna ask.
Okay. So since we don't have any public comments, I'm going to go right to committee business. The first item is approval of summary minutes for July 26, 2022.
Move adoption.
We have a motion. Do I have
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adopt the summary minutes of July 26, 2022. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. The matter passed 3-0. We are moving to item B, City of Federal Way Regional Labor Study will be presented by Dr. Morales. I hope I say your name right.
That was perfect. Good afternoon. Pleasure to be with you. It's good to come back. Last time I didn't get to describe the content in detail, so please stop me if you have a question, or you can, if you wish, you can ask the questions all at the end. This study basically is divided up into two parts. One is the analysis of the labor structure, basically looking at different sets of sectors in the city, and then the second part will be looking at job postings for 2 years, so you can see a pattern on labor recruitment within your city. So let me start by talking a little bit about the population growth and what's the projected. Of course, there is a population growth that we are taking a look at. Pretty much it stays about the same level, a little bit higher, and there's always a job and population growth kind of gap, which is understandable because typically you have more people than you have jobs in a city. That's not something that's unusual. However, this is where we are in terms of where the different sectors are in terms of employment. So this is a comparison of 2015 and 2021. So basically, actually, you're looking at a 5-year gap in the data, and it shows you the level of growth that you have seen, and the red marks are the national averages for a city of similar size. This suggests that there are 3 sectors that are the top ones. I want to point to them that they're not unusual for smaller cities, and when we say government, we mean every sector that's within the government structure, including education sector. So overall, this is the largest one. The one thing that's quite unique about Federal Way and one or more cities in this region is the healthcare component. Usually healthcare does not show up as a high employment sector, but when in a city has that, you want to find out what the pair is. In other words, how you can benefit from this beyond providing healthcare services. And in this case, as I will mention in a bit, is the importance of the growing presence of information sector in the city of Federal Way, and there's a combination there that you can benefit from. After that is actually retail trade, which has grown a little bit. But the area that you want to take a look at, which is now most cities are looking at, is the decline in accommodation and food services. This is one category of jobs nationally that is in a bit of a trouble. And the reason for that being is that they're low paying, and during COVID, they were impacted the most. And as such, people are not returning to those jobs. There is a leveling off of those positions over time. Let me see if I can get this not to jump around. All right. In terms of the changes that we've seen over time, these are in terms of percentages, not actual numbers. You will see that the information sector is showing the highest level of growth, but the size of that sector is quite small. Then after that is professional, scientific, and technical services and retail trade. There's something happening in the city of Federal Way that's quite important. Your workforce that might not be working here, but the number of people who work in these top three categories is growing over time, which is a unique opportunity for the city to be able to actually capture that. Retail is still growing, however, retail is slowing down, and I will show you in a second where that difference is. The areas that we are seeing decline is in manufacturing and accommodation and food services, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, and that's really important to keep track of as well. Now, this is one graph that actually the slide system is impacting. Your slides should look different than what's on the screen. Do you have the slides? The printed version.
We have iPad.
Somehow the upper part of the graph is being cut out.
What's the upper part of the graph supposed to look like? How much is being cut out? Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it here, but it looks the same as what it is.
Yeah, but on the screen
on
there,
the
it doesn't.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
If you don't
We're
mind, I'm
looking
gonna
at it on the
grab
iPad, but it looks the same as what,
Because see it, the bars got cut off on the screen.
So I just,
Oh,
I see
just,
dots. Is that what you're talking about?
No, let me come to this. Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can load it from here and simply talk from it if you have a copy of it in front of you.
I mean, here
The
it shows
propo-
the line going across, but,
What's on the screen over here, cut off, that's what he's saying, it's cut off there.
yeah. Okay, I see. Yeah,
So actually, the projection for the population was incorrect as well because it was showing flat,
Okay.
when in reality, your population will be growing.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm gonna talk about the graphs as I have it on the printout, not the way it appears on this screen. So essentially, where we are seeing growth is almost in all areas with a higher income category, and the red dots tells you the sectors that are declining, actually. Accommodation and food services is one of them, manufacturing, other services, transportation and warehousing. You're seeing some declines also in wholesale trade and in management and in utilities. But overall, the growth that we are seeing is in the higher level of what I mentioned already, which is in health services and in government sector. Now, when we look at, let me see if these are all graphs are messed up. So I'm just going to talk from the slides that you have. Or on your screens, are they okay? Or is it just up there? It's just up there. Okay. Now, one area that the slide that I want to point out for you to focus on, we use location quotient as a way of understanding what sector is overrepresented, meaning that they're strong in the region, and what that shows up is anything that's above 1. And for that, you have, again, healthcare services. Retail is slightly above 1, and the only other sector is actually government sector. All other sectors are below location quotient of 1, which means they're not highly represented. They have potential for growth. In terms of wages, basically what we are seeing, again, is that in areas like management and in computer and mathematical sciences, in legal, all of those are the jobs that are growing and the income for those are high. And what we are seeing more and more within City of Federal Way and other cities in the region is that the lower paying jobs are the ones that are declining over time. And therefore, there's a shift in the market that you need to keep track of. Fundamentally, the areas that are really important for you is this information and healthcare sector. I highly encourage the city to begin to take a look at that. You have a potential to look at the specific tech sector in the City of Federal Way, which is the tech sector that focuses on the combination of information and healthcare. In other words, healthcare high-tech areas. All right, and the top growing industries again for you is information, finance, professional and scientific, and a few others that are coming through time. There's one slide here that I need to walk you through. One way that when I came to this region about 10 years ago, I found the data for City of Federal Way quite fascinating. the number of people who leave the city to go work somewhere else and the number of people who come from somewhere else to work in the city of Federal Way at that time in 2013 was almost balanced. In other words, for every person that was leaving the city of Federal Way, one person was coming to the city of Federal Way to work, which meant a perfect imbalance. Now, when we are looking at it, we look at where your folks are coming from. So if you look at the table that has been provided to you, these are 2021 jobs. You have the jobs, and then you have resident workers. And what you're really seeing is the number of people who are coming to your region for what reason. So for example, in the health and personal care aids, you're actually importing workers. You see that? So the table actually shows you your difference between demand and supply. After that is security guards, elementary school, teaching assistant, bus drivers, and so on. But in the areas that you're actually sending people out, they're all the ones that show up with the red. These are areas in which people are actually leaving City of Federal Way to work elsewhere because there aren't enough jobs in those categories in the City of Federal Way. And the income level for each of those are actually identified as well.
Can I ask a quick question? Sorry.
Sure.
When you show that we're importing the people that are the lowest paid people on your graph,
Yeah,
isn't that a problem?
yeah.
Okay.
That's exactly how you want to look at it. You want to see who you're bringing, who is leaving, and then you will see in the job postings I will show you in a second, there is what we call a bifurcation happening in your labor market. High-paying labor that's here and very low-paying labor that's here. So that essentially means that the lower the pay, if they're leaving the region, the city, to go work elsewhere, they're even making less money because they're spending money on transportation.
Well, it seemed to me the reason, sorry for interrupting, but you talked about the three growth areas, healthcare, information, process, but our growth is in jobs that are produce less money
Exactly.
than the other ones. Is that
Correct.
Is that correct from
Yep.
your graphs?
Yep,
Okay.
you're
thank you.
understanding that correctly.
A question here, so like registered nurses, it shows 405 in the red, so that means there's 405 registered nurses
Who come-
that are,
Who actually have to leave to go somewhere
that
else.
live
to
in Federal Way that are leaving to go somewhere else.
Yeah. All right. Now for job postings. This is an interesting area of data. This data is collected on a quarterly basis. And when we look at it, we try to understand what are the kind of jobs that are being posted and the trend over time. So this is a trend from 2017 to May of 2022. The trend line is that dashed line that actually shows you that overall the growth is quite clear. In other words, the number of job postings have increased over time. The issue is for what kind of jobs, and that's where we're going to look into. And we will start with the salaries posting. Now, not every job has a salary posting. However, for those that have salary postings, you can see the distribution. We have, on the one hand, the 60,000 and higher that in 2021 actually was much more than in 2020. So remember, we are talking about COVID, high COVID and low COVID era, right? And so, because we're not out of pandemic yet. So advertised salaries essentially means that you have high income, but look, you have to go to the bottom of the graph to see the number of jobs that are advertising $40,000 and lower, not only are high, but also have grown into 2021. So the calendar year 2021 generated more jobs in lower income areas, which is typically the returning of the retail and services to the city and not proportional to the number of higher income jobs.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Are these full-time jobs?
These are mostly full-time jobs, yes.
Another question, doesn't that graph show that people are having to pay higher for the same people they got a year ago?
So actually, this is where you can see that in January 2020, when we were in high pandemic, the amount of money given was a little bit higher, then it went down, and in 2021 is readjusting up. So if you look at that graph, it allows you to see how the hourly averages, in other words, has worked out over time, over 2 years or 24 months. That's back to back.
Can I go back to the registered nurse question?
Sure.
So we have several different hospital systems here. So CHI University of Washington, Multicare. So I guess my question is, if they hire, I'm a registered nurse, but I don't work anymore as a nurse. If I were to work for CHI and I work here at St. Francis or in one of their Tacoma locations or another location, but I live here, I would then be leaving to work, but so do they only count their nurses where they live or where they,
It's in the city.
from their central location?
So if there are nurses living in the boundaries of City of Federal Way, however, they go to Tacoma to work, for example, they would be commuting. They're considered to be
Okay.
leaving city to go work. This is for exactly the boundary of the city.
Okay, thank you.
How's the information compiled?
This information comes from a company called EMSI, used to be called EMSI and it has changed. They collect that data on a quarterly basis based on their private data that they have. So in other words, they collect this data on a quarterly basis, and we use that data as at the aggregate
So
level.
they do it kind of as a representative sample then?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, they're not getting everybody.
No, it's a sample, and they correct it for the overall size that they have. So basically, they weigh the data as they go through this. This is their business.
So like on a poll, I mean, there's the margin of error.
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of margin of error is typical?
For these, are not typically very high. This is not something that you would be looking at plus minus 20%. That's not like that. So it's close enough. The thing that you don't want to pay attention to is that if it says 770, you don't want to use it as an exact number. It's like 750 to 800, somewhere there, but no bigger than that.
Okay.
I do have a question.
Yes. Oh.
I
think it's from
apologize.
Zoom. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm gonna take you back a few slides.
Okay.
One question is, you have lumped up professional science and technology. So my question, and then we also have information technology, which is the highest, right, on that
Yeah.
same graph? So why do we have technology here? And what's the difference between info tech and then this one, as well as what's professional? What is lumped or included in the professional?
In the professional category.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, in the professional category, the subsets are quite large. Information is much more narrower. So it specifically looks at information, data-oriented, information technology processing, things like that. It's not coding. It's not the kind of tech sector that you would have doing programming. The professional and scientific is combined because they're mostly research-oriented, and that's the sector. These are the larger categories. If you want to break it down to a smaller one, we can do that. But this is a much larger categories of.
So the technology in here is different from infotech then, right?
Yes.
And, okay, all right, thank you. And so, okay, so the technology here is, would that be like medical type of,
Yeah.
where they have either medical research or those things would be the technology that's lumped in this category, correct?
Yes, if they're,
Okay.
the labor is qualified that way.
All right, thank you so much.
The job postings themselves kind of highlight that what we are actually getting in the data are typically getting information about service-oriented jobs and low-skill jobs. The higher-skill jobs don't show up a lot, and you can tell that from educational attainment or educational requirement. Majority of them did not list any educational requirement, the job postings, and typically about 3/4 for high school or no indication of educational attainment or requirement. Now, what we are seeing, that kind of matches the income category that we have for the jobs. In other words, the wages that are being offered. In terms of what is being offered, in terms of experience, is the same thing. Typically, what we find in these job postings is either no mention of a requirement for experience, or much smaller in terms of what is expected of the labor. Overall, the job postings kind of give us this bifurcated issues of the market as well. The thing that is unique about these jobs is that when we look at who is posting the most, it's interesting to see that in both years, Amazon was one of the major job posting company followed by health organizations, DaVita in 21, and Common Spirit Health in 2020. Then after that, there's a variation. The top two typically tends to be either warehousing or in health categories.
Question, back on the education requirements. It seems like there should be, I mean, that there's really no, for example, in the trades, I mean, there's certain experience or education requirements for the trades that wouldn't be included with these categories of associates or bachelors or
Yeah,
whatever.
this
I
is
mean,
the shortcoming of the data. There is no trade school component to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just basically the traditional high school, community college.
Is there a reason why there isn't?
I have no idea why they haven't included, but mostly their data is, because typically census data works that way as well. And they're following census data, so in some ways they have not included that.
Okay.
When they say high school, it's inclusive of any high school that has trade component or community college that has a trade component.
All right, thank you.
Jack, I
Yes.
work in the trades. Would you like to know where all the work is? It's in Seattle. There's not a lot of construction or anything like that going on.
Yeah.
Outside of Seattle city limits, even with smaller contractors, most of my work is Seattle and north, all the way to Everett.
Tacoma, where my office is just crazy with building right now.
And I do have, well, I had a couple of contracts in Tacoma as well, but most of it is Seattle, Kirkland, and Bothell.
Okay.
Well, you also are competing with every city that has health sector for registered nurses. As you can see, for terms of job postings, registered nurses are always on the high end and the high demand side. This is going to be an issue for a lot of cities in this region that have health sector because they're competing against each other for nurses. That means, to your question about why nurses leave from one area to other, there's also this competition for salaries, right? So in the market, typically every person trades between transportation and housing value. We always think of the way we make decisions as a combination of those two costs. And if you have high income, you can actually afford to buy more expensive houses, and therefore you can have lower transportation costs. As the income declines, you actually have to move further away, paying transportation but lowering housing cost, which essentially means in a region like ours, typically what happens is that a worker begins to sort of think about where they can optimize their income for the kind of housing and the kind of services that they need. Now, that uniquely is important for the city of Fairway. And let me, without going through the rest of the slides, let me highlight something very important
Can I
about
ask you one more
Fairway.
question? One
Yeah.
more question. These graphs, the first one says 0 to 1,400, and the second one says 0 to 1,200. Doesn't that skew the bar reading?
Which
So
one are you looking at?
If you got just
Page
January
24.
21 and December 2020, and because the bar goes to 1,200 versus 1,400, it makes it look like there's more jobs being, the lines are bigger on the right side than the left. And
Yeah, those are based on the actual scale of the bar.
If they
Yeah.
were scaled, they'd probably be closer.
That's correct. So one of the things that is important for this region, like we are learning in the last couple of years, is an important issue. Metropolitan areas that have a lot of smaller cities around them. In other words, they have major centers of employment, and then they have a satellite of cities around them. Something very unique is emerging nationally. There's a study done at the University of Chicago in the middle of pandemic to identify the percentage of workers that can work remotely in the US, even when we don't have pandemic. Their estimate is somewhere around 37% of all jobs in the US can be done remotely. That typically happens in a metropolitan area like ours. Individual cities can't do that. And service workers, construction workers, people who are in the middle to lower income can't do that. So typically it's a higher income, typically the kind of jobs that allow for you to be away, which means two things are happening. One is that major cities, they're centers. Imagine like Seattle downtown. Those centers are having commercial real estate challenge because not everybody wants to have the same kind of square footage. On the other hand, what we are seeing is that the smaller cities that have an infrastructure that accommodates remote work are beginning to attract this population back to their cities. And that population is no longer commuting, which means what they need, though, not everybody wants to stay home and work. What they're looking for is shared workspaces and common spaces that they can interact with. There is a need in this region that I haven't seen a lot of cities do yet, mid-sized to smaller cities, to take a look at what is the portion of their population that could potentially work within the boundaries of the city, regardless of where their jobs are. Now, I want to let you know that also nationally, there are a couple of cities that are advertising themselves at the national level, saying if you can work remotely, you can live in our cities, housing cost is lower. And what they have decided to do, they have decided to invest in actually high fiber optic and backbone, high infrastructure to attract that population in the lower cost housing, remote work, better climate type of thing. Now, for us, that essentially means that cities that are satellite and closest to the triangle of Renton, Bellevue, and Seattle are going to be able to benefit from that. In other words, there is a possibility for that. It seems to me that the data for the city of Federal Way is saying you already have an emerging population that's working in the information sector and in the professional and tech sectors. They might be able to work anywhere, but if they stay here and work remotely, they can be captured here. Now, investment has been made in the city in the arts sector. Investment has also been made in the retail sector. And here's one of the unique things about this population as they begin to look. They look at diversity, they look at arts and entertainment, and they look at services and food. You have two of those. You have really built that kind of infrastructure for you to be able to attract that portion of the population into the city. The live, work, and play really is here.
Do they look at schools?
They do look at schools. And typically, let me be frank with you, this is how it works. They look at schools as soon as they have their children.
Right.
If there are two-income families without kids, they're not looking at that yet. And typically, that's what we saw before COVID, is that's the population that was willing to live in downtowns of the United States. Now that as soon as they have children, they begin to move. Now, for City of Federal Way, the move would be looking at the educational system as well.
What about, the company WeWorks and, where they do places to gather to work?
Mm-hmm.
Are you suggesting those type of approaches in infrastructure would draw people to an area?
It has to be, first you have to have an assessment of how many you already have, not how many you're going to attract.
Right, but
But
if you wanted to drive more to you, are you suggesting take that type business model that SoftBank, WeWorks did, where they had all these places people could rent for a day or
Yeah.
a week, and so they could gather?
Yeah, I think we are seeing it in some of the cities around. Tacoma has one of the shared spaces as well. It's a single room somebody rents to use for their office, X number of days a month. So one of the ways to begin to think about is what we talk about future of work. The future of work is not what it used to be, and pandemic proved to us that typically what we thought couldn't happen, which is the assumption was that people, when they're home, they don't work. It turned out to be not true. People actually do continue working at a high level of productivity when they're at home, and they're not in the office.
So I have another question about that. So if, for instance, my son works for Nordstrom's and his office was sold the first year of the pandemic, and the company gave him money to outfit his office at home. And his boss doesn't even live in this state. She lives a couple time zones away. Do we need to have homes built, encourage builders to put in home offices with the high-tech things that someone would need to have a home office to get more people to move here so that they could work remotely?
Well, that could work, but what I'm suggesting is a little bit different than that. So regardless of how much you can work at home, we are going to get to a point where people need to be away from home a day or two,
Right.
to not be able to be busy with the home stuff. So there are two parts to this. One is that the shared workspace is needed. The second part, absolutely. Cities that are interested in that kind of population, the first thing to look at is that do you have the infrastructure for the internet usage, the bandwidth that needs to be delivered to neighborhoods, number one. Number two, can the houses actually be accommodating that, right? And that's where your comment comes in. But the third space, which is really important, is the shared space.
Okay, thank you.
So if you were to build infrastructure downtown where market rate apartments were, and you built in those buildings places for people to work so they get out of their houses so they could gather, and that's kind of what you're saying,
Yeah.
right? So you take a floor of a building and say, we're gonna develop this, and here's the common workspace people could go when they walk out of their building and go across the street to the
Yeah.
place they can gather with other people.
Yeah, and this is the way for people to see other people at work, but not necessarily co-workers from the same company. The one thing that we're seeing nationally also is the conversion of plazas for that purpose. Plazas that are not functioning really well anymore and the retail has closed off and gone, those are being converted for that purpose as well. There's a lot of land use decisions to be made. Any other questions for me? Well, there's a report that goes with all the slides, so I hope you can read those, and if there are any questions, you can forward it to my office. I'm happy to respond to them. But thank you for the opportunity. I live just practically next door to City of Federal Way.
Can
So,
I ask one more question?
sure.
When you look at these growths of markets or where people work, do you have any projections on, you said, what was the percent of people that work at home now? Did you say 37?
Well, nationally, it's 37%.
Oh, 37%.
But I haven't done that calculation for City of Federal Way, but I've done it for a couple of cities in our region because I was curious about the commuting pattern on what would happen. In our region, most of the numbers I'm seeing is in the range of 30 to 35%. That's the range. My guess would be for you would be around 30%.
Okay, so let's say it's 30, let's say it's 25%. So if the City of Federal Way wanted to attract people that are higher income, that are working from home, the new norm, 25% of those people, if we do the infrastructure and we become a great place for those 25% for the people to recreate or do whatever, we would have an opportunity to draw those citizens to our community over going to a city that doesn't have the gathering place, doesn't have the high-speed internet,
Yeah.
doesn't have the light rail station. And that's kind of the.
And you already have invested, for example, in an arts center. This is really important.
Yeah.
You have some of the ingredients of what people would be looking for, but don't underestimate this issue that all the cities are competing for that.
Everybody wants to do it.
Yeah,
It's
but
a
so
matter of
marketing
who's
of what
first.
you have is really important. It's not just simply build it and they will come.
Any other question?
So where are you based out of, you said? You're
In Tacoma.
Tacoma,
Yeah,
okay.
I'm
And you-
practically
he
next
must
door.
tell you, he's also a geography major.
You have to advertise. We are fellow geographers. All right.
This is great information and very interesting information and helpful information. Thank you. We
My
appreciate it.
pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming back. Thank you. We appreciate it. Well, he did have to come back.
Okay, so we are moving on to item C on the agenda, ordinance establishing an urban forestry fund. Keith?
Good evening, Committee Chair Tran, sorry. Working on my technical skills, which apparently I need still help on. And committee members, Dovie Norton, Council President Kochmar, Deputy Mayor Honda, and Council members Walsh and Asefa Dawson. Keith Niven, Planning Manager. This evening before you is a proposal to create a new chapter in City Code. Right now, under Title 19, which is our Development and Zoning Code, we basically allow for some flexibility for land developers in terms of tree retention if they cannot provide those trees on site. What the code says, and I have that section here in front of you, basically what it says is they can pay a fee in lieu of, and that we put that money into an urban forestry account, which then can be used by the city to plant trees in other locations where it may be more practical. The problem is we don't have an urban forestry fund, and so what the policy question here is this evening is, should the City Council amend Chapter 350 of the Federal Way Revised Code to create an urban forestry fund? The options are to adopt a proposed ordinance, which is attached, to do not adopt the proposed ordinance and provide direction to staff. And the mayor's recommendation is to approve the proposed ordinance. Any questions? Hopefully it's straightforward.
Ask Mr. Dovey.
Yeah, I have a question. One, I think it's probably a good idea, but I remember years ago on West Campus Way, on the right-hand side, as you're coming towards the pool, there was that hill, all those houses there. And one day, we got all these pictures. The developer went in there and cut every single tree down. We got birds on the ground. It was a big mess, and we had people here forever. Now, if we have this urban fun, and now we're encouraging developers to clear-cut trees, and instead of asking them to be more environmentally sound and leaving the trees, that's why people buy houses in their neighborhoods sometimes. I mean, I get it to have the fun to put trees in, but are we really just saying to a developer, you don't have to think about it, just cut it down and we'll put a tree somewhere else?
So that's a great question. So there's, even though it doesn't feel like it in a lot of ways, there's a lot of topography in Federal Way. And if you have to kind of leave the topography close to natural grade, I mean, you look at properties like where the Home Depot is, and there's a giant retaining wall next to Enchanted Parkway, and even with the projects under construction now, like Smith Brothers across from the hospital, they go in and they want to create a big flat pad to make their project as efficient as possible on the property. Sometimes you can preserve some of the trees around the edges. Clearly when there's critical areas, so this does not apply to critical areas. If there was a wetland, you have to retain the vegetation in the wetland and the buffer. That's a different story. This is for when it's non-critical areas. So yes, the council could choose to say, you know what, let's require them to retain the trees on site, and let's go back in and amend Title 19 to remove that flexibility. That is definitely a choice that you guys have in front of you. It is, what I would say is, most of the development that we have on our horizon is stuff in the downtown. It's stuff down by South Station. It's stuff that's already been developed once already. So whatever trees are there are likely not native. And what this does is allows us to potentially use some of those funds to actually plant trees in stands that will be more meaningful for the community in the long run. So it's pros and cons. There's probably not an ultimate right answer here, but right now the code does allow for some flexibility, and what this is proposing is that we actually create a formal fund to put that money into, so that we can, when we then want to go plant some trees, we can then pull that money out again.
Go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. Did you tell us where the fund was going to be, where the money was coming from for that? And I just wasn't listening.
Sure. I don't, I don't, that was a leading question. I'm going to say that, so the money that will populate this fund is coming from developers who choose to pay into it rather than trying to retain some of the trees on their property.
Good. Okay, I like that answer. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Honda.
Thank you. So, let's bring up IRG. Why not? How does this affect them? I mean, they've certainly taken down more trees than we can count.
So, so there's, I guess I can answer that a couple different ways. One is the provision in code which allows for the fee in lieu of, it exists in code now. So they could have taken advantage of that provision in the code. The city's tree retention code in and of itself, if the council felt like our tree canopy was shrinking to a point where it was becoming of a concern for the community, I would say that our tree retention code is probably more lenient than some other cities in the region. And that might be something that we could take a look at some point if that is the council's desire.
Can I piggyback on this as well, and not about our IRG? I just want to add that this is a classic case of a restricted revenue that we would love to have in the finance department, a special fund, so that when we get restricted revenue, it's segregated so that we can spend it the way that Keith is describing. I just wanted to add that feature. Thank you.
So, I have a couple more questions, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
So do we know how much would be put into this fund? Is there, I don't see an amount of money that a developer would need to put into the fund.
So we're creating the fund, and the fund sits there, and it is basically empty until developers choose to pay into the fund as opposed to retaining their trees on site. So far, to my knowledge, no developer has asked to do this. So maybe getting back to your IRG question as well, which if you notice I didn't really answer, I assume that even with the tree removal on site, they are meeting their tree retention on their property with what's going on out there now. So that gets back to the other part of this, which is if you want us to look at the tree retention code at some point, we can do that. But the point is that unless the council wanted to put some money into this fund as a budget item, which is not what's being asked, this is really funded through developer kind of mitigations, if you will, as a, in lieu of them providing those trees on site. So the number could be zero for a long time, or it could grow into tens of thousands of dollars, depending on the amount of development that happens and what developers choose to do.
But I still don't understand, I guess. So let's say a developer goes in and it's a piece of property that's never been developed before, lots of trees, lots of older trees, not, well, I'll say old growth just because. They cut every tree down. So how much then would they have to put into this?
Sure. So, and I'm going to make up some numbers because I can't recite the tree code
So it's
by heart.
it's listed somewhere.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
There's a certain retention requirement that each property owner needs to abide by when they develop. And let's just say on your hypothetical property, it would be 30, 3-foot diameter trees. And so that has a value to it. And let's say the developer says, I really want to put a coffee shop where those 30 trees are, and I really don't have place for 30 trees to replant them on my property. That's his first choice. His or her first choice is they can replant the trees on their property if they have room for it. If this particular developer doesn't have room, then you'd come up with a valuation of those trees, and you would then write a check and put it in our bank account for our use to then plant. And my guess is, we end up planting little trees, so we could plant way more than 30 somewhere else in the city.
And for us to be able to appropriate it and spend it, we would need to bring a budget amendment, report the revenue, and then get budget authorization to spend it. So you would see it in our monthly reporting as well, and on budget amendments.
So somewhere, somewhere there's a document that says what each tree would be worth.
So there's a document that says how many caliper of trees have to be saved, and then an arborist typically then assigns a value to that,
Okay.
or a tree professional does.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Councilmember Walsh, and then Councilmember Dovey, and then Councilmember Asefa Dobson, and then Erica
Thank
Norton.
you. Thank you,
So-
sir.
So if I'm understanding correctly, so this fee thing has been in place in the past, but in the past, all of the developers have abided by the retention requirements of trees.
That's my
So we've
understanding.
never had a developer not abide by the retention requirements.
That's my understanding.
Interesting, okay, all right. And then, just kind of a corollary here, a few months ago, wasn't there a discussion of a tree city designation? I mean, how can this coordinate with that, or can it coordinate with it?
It can coordinate with it. I'm looking at our park director back there, who's not going to make eye contact with me. So there's certain requirements for becoming a Tree City USA, and I believe it's allocating a certain number of resources to trees, their maintenance and planting, and I believe it also may require us to have an arborist either on staff or have a contract with an arborist. But I'm going to stop there. John, do you have any details on Tree City USA?
I think your depiction was absolutely correct, especially the part about me trying not to make eye contact. But I believe that is the stipulations that you laid out, plus there's probably a few more, would create the ability to meld Tree City clarification or classification into that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, so my question is, where would we plant these trees? Does it have to be on parkland or city-owned land? I mean, generally, somebody wants to take trees down to develop something, you have to replace 30 for 30 or whatever it is. I mean, where are we talking about planting these things if we do this fund?
Sure. So right now, it's the way that the ordinance is written is it's at the park director's discretion. He gets to kind of pick. Parkland clearly is one of the potential locations. Streetscapes. So if we were going to go back in and put street trees in on certain streets that may not have them now, also medians, other places that are public places would be the first kind of, I think, destination for receiving the trees from this fund.
And then if we do that, we'll get the comment we did yesterday in budget that the trees are by the road and the park department doesn't have the money to take the roots out or change them because, I mean, so it seems to me that the reason we had the tree retention in our code was so developers didn't clear the land and we kept some natural trees there. And now we're kind of saying, clear the land and we're gonna put them on our parks, and that might be a whole nother issue. And we already put trees everywhere we put a road. I mean, that's kind of in our policy, so, I don't know. I see it's a good idea to have a fund, but it's almost counterproductive to everything we've done in the history of this city, unless I'm missing something.
I believe we have more parks that are needed in the city, especially as we continue to grow over the next 20 years. We've been talking about the need for a park down by the South Station area, especially if we're going to rezone some areas to residential. So there's, I don't know that our job is done yet.
I agree we need more parks, but I can't see, if we get a big fund and we go trees and we go to Celebration Park and we're not gonna put any more trees where we recreate, and we're not gonna put them in the natural area, I mean, we just don't have big plots of land to go plant groves of trees. I don't, maybe I'm wrong, I just think.
If I may, I would say that one of the things that Public Works has done really well over the last several years, but prior to that, a good example of a poor street tree are the ones down by the Aquatic Center that block all the flagpoles.
Yes.
That was the wrong tree, planted, now they're huge, they obscure the flagpoles, they're a giant mess and a big problem, and they're the wrong tree. Public Works has done a nice job of creating the appropriate street trees that don't cause the problems that Deputy Mayor brought up last night regarding the road through Celebration Park. We have a lot of root damage. So, and then the appropriate height is good. It keeps them out of the wires, keeps them out of the lights, keeps them out of, it's the appropriate tree for the appropriate location. That helps a lot with street trees as we go forward, not planting difficult tree species that are a problem down the road.
Yes.
You okay with that, Jeff?
So this is a mechanism to put a bucket out when it's raining money from one particular source.
Lydia, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And so my question is, and maybe it's not even a question, but I'm going through the weeds. So there's a development on First and 340th?
348th.
340th, yeah. So I did see the retaining wall that's going up, but it's a little bit further from the street. So is that why they left that space? That's my question one, and maybe you don't know the answer to this, but there's the space between the street and the wall that they built. So I'm hoping it's actually for trees. But my question then is, are we going to require Director Hutton just said something about the tree type. So are we going to require certain types of trees to be planted? Because, I mean, I like the idea just because people who come to Federal Way always tell me how beautiful it is because of the trees and the vegetation. So I'm happy about this, but that's also my question. Are we going to require what kind of trees? And then why don't they pay like we require them with all the other development? So why is the city even funding this?
There were a lot of questions there, so let me start.
Sorry about that.
No, this is all good. So one, to be clear, the city is not funding this. This would be completely reallocated developer funds. So the developers will put the monies into this particular fund, and then the city will have the discretion to use those funds to either plant or maintain existing trees. When we talk about certain tree types, there are certain cities that have a signature tree. As far as I know, we do not have a signature tree, but the conversation that I think was happening was about trees when they're planted in confined spaces, such as in planter strips or in street medians. You want a tree that has a particular root structure so that those roots don't end up buckling the curbing and or sidewalks. And so there are particular trees, and there's also trees that have certain shape of canopies that are more columnar, which you may want in certain areas instead of kind of a broad canopy, which might cause problems for visibility or traffic or other things. And so I think there are reasons to pick particular trees for the setting in which they're being planted. And as far as far as what's happening at First and 348th, I do not know, but I can get you a site plan if you're interested.
I am interested because I would love to see that there. Thank you so much for your answer.
Yes.
Great, thanks. All right.
Councilmember Norton.
Hey, I was just wondering, so is this fund subject to having its color changed so it can be put in the general fund and disappear? Or is it going to be specifically for this and we can't touch it for anything else?
I'm going to call a finance friend for this one.
This is so that it will be restricted revenue, so that
Like the REIT fund?
It's, anything that's anything that's given to us with a restricted purpose has to be spent for that purpose, and so that's what the purpose of having a segregated fund.
So nobody's gonna come and make a presentation about how it'd be better used somewhere else down the road when it's like, I don't know, $500,000 or something?
I don't want to have Keith Nivens come and beat me up later, no.
Okay, I just wanna make sure. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Honda and then Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. So, my husband and I discuss the street trees all the time, you know, because he works for a tree company. So there are trees that are appropriate to be planted next to a street, but if a canopy is this wide and goes over a street, that's where the roots are gonna go. So you need trees that go up. And as to Campus Drive, I would take those trees out in a heartbeat and replace them with appropriate trees, so not only can we see the flagpoles that are really an asset to this community, but we don't destroy the street that was recently redone just a year or so ago. And the sooner we can do that, the better. And I know it's gonna cost money, but it's something that I think to maintain the street and the safety, it would be important. So that's what I would do. I would also really watch where we put trees along streets, because if you notice on Campus Drive, several times a year, someone hits a tree. And they never hit the trees that I would like to be hit, so that the flagpole can be seen, but trees are knocked down there on a regular basis. So when we do put trees next to streets, I think we have to really watch where we do that, and maybe not along a curve, a big curve that people have a hard time navigating, and that kind of stuff, so.
All right, my kind of a, the other Jack had his concern that, that if we did this, it would be motivation for developers just to clear everything and not try to keep anything. But as I understand, if I'm correct, this is not changing what the developers can do. It is just designating where the funds would go. Is that correct?
Right. What we're talking about this evening is not changing Title 19, which is our development code. It's creating a fund, a specific reciprocal for those funds to go into, so they don't get mixed with other things.
So in the past, if a developer would have taken advantage of this, it would have gone in the general fund rather than the specific fund?
I'm looking at my finance friends.
Good question. The power of accounting to set up segregated funds is what we're looking to accomplish. I'm not sure about what happened in the past.
Okay, all right. So we're not changing, I mean, if we wanted to review whether we wanted developers to not be able to do something, that would be a different question than what we're addressing tonight.
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
So I just want to clarify what Councilmember Walsh just said. If I'm a developer today and I want to take every tree down so I can build the building I want, I can come to the city and write a check and we let them do that. We don't ask them to replace trees.
The check that they're writing is for the replaced trees that they are choosing to not provide on their property.
And we do that today.
We do that today.
So we get money, some fee, whatever it is, and it comes into whatever fund, and we can go plant trees. This is just codifies that the money goes into one account.
And is very specific, kind of like school impact fees and traffic impact fees. It's very specific on what it's for and what it can be and who gets to use it.
Okay, so we do let people just clear cut for a fee right now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, great
Make a
discussion.
motion.
Let's go ahead.
I move to forward the proposed ordinance to first reading on October 4, 2022.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Matter passed 3-0. And we are moving to item D, generator maintenance repair state contract. Autumn,
Thank you.
welcome.
Good evening, Committee Chair Tran, Council President Coach Mar, Deputy Mayor Honda, and committee members. Thank you for having me this evening. Autumn Gressett, Contract Administrator. I'm here to discuss the Washington State contract for generator maintenance. We are looking to propose, the policy question before you tonight is, should the city purchase maintenance and repair services from Pacific Power Group LLC for an amount not to exceed $209,999.99. That's over the lifetime of the contract, not for a one-year period. The contract would be 3 years with an opportunity to extend for 1 year, and this is under Washington State contract that went out to bid with Department of Enterprise Services. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you. Councilmember Dolphy?
I move adoption. And go to the consent agenda.
Second.
That was easy. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The matter passed 3-0.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Autumn said she'd answer any questions. I was going to ask her what her favorite color was or something like that, just.
All right. Item E, purchase of Canon large format plotters. Thomas?
Good evening, Committee Chair Tran, council members, Deputy Mayor, Council President. Before you tonight is a authorization or approval request to purchase 2 large format copiers or plotters, technically plotters. One we use in the Public Works Workroom, the other one we use in GIS. The Public Works Workroom one is the currently a TDS 750. We're looking to replace that with a ColorWave 3600. So we're transitioning from a toner black and white based large format to a color capable one, which is a good step in the right direction. And we're able to do that with the budget that we have. And then we're also looking to consolidate 2 GIS plotters into one. We don't have a need for 2 of them in our area, and so we're consolidating that into one. Having both units color provides a better service for the city as well. As you can see from the staff report that I presented, both purchases come in underneath the amount of budget that we have collected, which is very surprising considering the price increases that we've had this year. So we'll be doing this off of the state contract. It's the NASPO contract noted on the staff report, and both will be purchased from Copiers Northwest, who the city currently uses for copy and print services. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Your question?
I move to forward the proposed purchase with Copiers Northwest to the October 4, 2022 regular council meeting consent agenda.
I second that.
All right, we have a motion and second. Is there any other questions?
No.
Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All right.
Such a easy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so item F, since we did not have our regular meeting in the month of August, so we have 2 set of vouchers that we need to consider. One is for July and, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so AP voucher for July 16 through August 15, and then payroll voucher for the 1st of July until July 31st of 2022. Chase.
Good evening, Council Chair Tran, Council President Kochmar, Deputy Mayor Honda, and Council Committee members. Before you are the AP vouchers from 7/16 through 8/15 in the amount of $5,632,091.34, and payroll vouchers in the amount of $4,242,397.33. And then, do we want to go into the other agenda as well, or do we, as kind of one item between the two? Yeah, and AP vouchers from 8/16/2022 to 9/15/2022 in the amount of $4,335,315.24, and payroll vouchers in the amount of $4,157,698.13. These are all amounts that are within normal ranges for previous months. And we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. And we also can follow up with any questions that we're not able to answer at this meeting in an email after the meeting. But these can still potentially be approved. So we'd be happy to help with that if you have any questions.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I have a question.
Okay. I was just gonna speed it up.
And I'm going to talk really slow.
Just as long as you don't ask, just as long as you don't ask about the ice cream cone on page 37.
I was going to ask about George, but
Okay. I have an answer.
You do?
Yes.
About George?
Yes, I do.
No, George, there's a voucher that is replacing George.
Yes, we're replacing George
Who is George?
Hauser, which is a construction inspector, is equipment,
Oh.
IT equipment that we replaced for him. And we should have truncated the description a little more, and so we will make sure to try to do that in the future. But sometimes we don't always truncate our descriptions, and then the report only has a certain amount of letters to include.
It's always
So,
interesting.
yeah, but it's IT equipment for George Hauser, a construction inspector that we have for the city.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Yes.
And I'm not going to disappoint you. I did send you a couple questions on the
Great.
first set of vouchers at 5, and I'm going to go through the second set of vouchers tonight, and I'll send those later this week.
Okay, great.
So I don't
Well,
want to disappoint you. I know how you look forward to my questions.
I have there's an AP technician that works in our group that does a great job in paying lots of invoices every 2 weeks, and she pulls those for us and gets those prepared for us to send you an email back. So we're very thankful for Danielle Nevels that does all of our AP payments for the city. So
Thank you, I appreciate it.
I move adoption of item F and G that's put on the consent agenda.
Second.
I'm gonna check in with city attorney. Is that good enough for the motion? Okay,
He said consent agenda, right? Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The matter passed 3-0. And we are moving to item H, monthly financial report for the month of July. And should we do item I as well for the month of August? You want to combine?
I would like to combine it, and the reason being the July monthly financial report is cumulative, and the August is just a little further update, so if.
Makes sense.
In the interest of time, and it just makes sense, right? Let me take you back in time to, almost 2 years ago when we were adopting the 21-22 budget. All the monthly financial report does is it provides you monthly accountability on how we are tracking to that budget. Of course, we're in budget study sessions now for the next biennium, but we are 8 months along. This is for the results of August, because September isn't closed. We're not quite to the end of September. And in your packet, you've got the report. Now, I started putting page numbers in the upper right-hand corner for anybody that wanted to check to see where the numbers came from, but it's not news that every month we give you good news. Revenues have been favorable almost every month this year. This month, expenditures are exactly even with budget. If they were negative, why then we would be looking to see how revenues are tracking. But you can see that revenues are substantially above. It's a pretty healthy margin that they are coming in monthly. The expenses are even. Some expenses we prepaid at the beginning of the year, such as our insurance premiums, and so that's a little trickier, but every department does manage to budget. So I make sure that we look at the revenues every month, and if I was to give you a revenue dashboard, this would be the list of the most material revenues that we have. The first column there shows what the eventual annual budget we're hoping that they attain. Next column shows what the year-to-date budget is and what the year-to-date actual, and they're all positive. They're all doing extremely well. And I have a few graphs. Now, this one, I put it's on page 226, but that's just sort of. We don't really show you this graph. This is an odd graph, but when you think of how property tax comes into us and accumulates during the year, why we get two primary seasons of payments when the King County tax collector sends out the bills, while we get the first big payments in April and May. And then, so the graph jumps up there, and then at the end of the year, it jumps up in October and November. We typically don't stress too much about when we receive it. It's more about whether we receive it. And if we don't receive property tax, why then sometimes it goes until a property changes hands, and then the tax collector is going to get it one way or another, and so we will get ours. And we budgeted in the shaded section, the blue line shows what we received last year, and we're getting a little bit more than we did last year. We're ahead of where we thought we'd be according to our budget calculations by 163,000 or 2.6%. All that is just, we're just checking to make sure that we're on track, and we are in a positive direction. Sales tax, the data for that's on page 228, and this has been consistent. Every month we have exceeded prior year. We've also exceeded our budget expectations, and this informed us when we did our sales tax forecasts for the next 2 years. Utility taxes as a group, same exact thing. The current year is tracking almost exactly as it did last year, and that just means volumes and rates are pretty much the same. Not new. You can see that we budgeted cautiously conservatively so that we are having actuals that come in that beat budget. Lodging tax is a small dollar amount. The axis, the scale on the left only goes up to 150,000 budgeted. Last year we almost received 200,000, and this year, in the first 7 months, we have virtually achieved what we budgeted. So this is not only good news for the revenue to the city, but it's also good news for the leisure, for the hotel sector and the tourism. This comes exclusively from overnight hotel stays, and that means that that's the economy of the city. There's a multiplier effect for local restaurants and whatnot. This is just a good one to watch. And our cash continues to stay high. We are investing consistently $4 million every month. We're up to $44 million. The annualized interest would be $2 million, except we do anticipate we're going to be spending the ARPA $19 million over the next 2 years. So if we could count on it staying in the bank, we would be forecasting $2 million in next year's budget, but we're forecasting only, I use air quotes to say only, because to have $1.8 million of budgetable revenue next year is wonderful. And I'm not just patting ourselves on the back in finance, because we could not have predicted that the interest rates would go up. We are riding the wave, and we are very fortunate for that. Our average return in our investments is 1.71, but we just a couple days ago almost got a 4%. I think we got 3.9. So the rates continue to inch up, and we continue to capture that, locking it in for 4 years. That is a real help to our budget. And here's the
Can I interrupt and ask a quick question on that?
Yes.
To what point, I mean, if you can go back to the previous
Sure.
previous one.
Yes.
Okay. So at what point will we cap the investments? I mean, the blue coming out there and the green.
Yeah, that's going to level off because
yeah.
we're going to want to retain some liquidity.
But where will that be? At half of it or what? I mean, I'm just curious.
I've got a little pie chart coming up, but we're going to save about half of what is our remaining liquidity, just to stay conservative. And as interest rates go up, I'm not in a hurry to lock anything in. But yeah, we also look at our 2-year budget to see what our eventual spending is of our capital funds. We don't want to lock in a 4-year investment if we're going to have a capital spend in 2 years.
Okay, all righty.
Excellent question. Thank you.
Question that you said 4 years. I thought we were doing 2 years.
We have built a ladder of four years worth of maturities. We have our first one maturing in October next month, and we'll purchase one 48 months out. So it's a 4-year ladder now.
But wasn't, at one time, we were only going 2 years out at a time?
As we started, yes.
And when
yes.
did we switch to 4 years?
In my 18 years of investing, the highest I have ever been able to purchase was a 5% bond. So when we passed 2.5%, I thought that was the appropriate time to start going longer. We're seeing interest rates of 4% now, and since we know things are cyclical, I don't know when when rates are going to go down again.
Right. Oh, I understand we're getting great rates now. I mean, you see it everywhere.
But it's an art and it's not a science. We have to look at our cash flow, and we also have to look at when we are only investing money that we think is our base core cash that we're never going to touch. It's our reserves.
And maybe I'm the only one who didn't understand. I thought we were doing 2-year blocks. I didn't realize we were doing 4-year blocks.
Our first purchase was a 3-year, and we filled in backwards, and then now we're going forwards, if that makes sense.
So Steve, I do have a question.
Sure.
So I know we need to keep some money, and we can't just, use that money and invest. What if we use that money to invest, and if we need it, we need to take out the money a little earlier, what the penalty would be, and compare that with the potential interest?
Sure, the penalty is the market rate that bonds are trading at right now. So we would have to sell at a discount.
I see.
Which is why it's good to have $1 million maturing every single month. All we have to do is not reinvest, and then we get $1 million back every single month. And I will just skip ahead 2 slides, because here's what you're asking. Of the total 110 million that we have, the pale green section on the left is what's in our local government investment pool. It's on deposit with the Treasury. We can get it tomorrow in any amount that we want. So that's very liquid. Now, we know that we're going to spend down another 18. I think we've spent a little bit of our ARPA money, but if we spend it all, we would just say, okay, that money is just going to be spent when the invoices for the police cars come in, when the invoices for whatever comes in. So that, we're going to just leave liquid. Also, we're going to be paying down the $5 million in November for the Target debt, and that will no longer be there. So we're not going to invest that either. Of what's left, that's our liquidity, and we've got about half that we think is still investable, but I don't think we're going to. I think we're going to be very cautious from about next month on. We're going to watch to see what the economy's doing, what the rates are doing, and we're going to be watching our capital spending and what we're doing.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question.
This is what, these are questions finance committees are supposed to ask.
Go ahead.
So, I'm always paying attention to the market and everything. I have a question. So, someone that I like watching certain financial investor videos and classes, and from what I understand is the market goes down, bonds go up in value. Is that correct? And then vice versa, right?
It is.
So my question is, as the market's starting to trend down, we're going into a bear market right now. So our bond value will increase, correct?
It will. Some of the bonds, yes.
As long as the dollar still has its value, and it's because it's rising in value right now, or it has been recently. So as long as that trend continues, the bonds should be okay.
Absolutely. And I will say that, say, for example, we bought a bond and then the stock market went down, or no, the stock market goes up. The value of our bond goes down. We only lose value if we sell it. If we keep it to maturity, we will always get the $1 million back at the maturity. So that's why we were making sure that we don't need to sell a bond.
The payout will remain the same as long as we wait until the actual date that we're supposed to withdraw the funds then?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
This is fixed income. We get our interest on each bond once every 6 months on a specified date schedule, and then we get our principal back when it matures. Absolutely fixed. So that's why when I say we're locking them in, we've locked in the coupon payments, and we know at what date we'll get our principal back.
Nice. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Certainly. We do not have budget on this agenda. I am not going to talk about the content. I do want to just, I do have a question for you on the timing. Because FedRAC is going to be coming up again next month. We still have one more budget presentation evening, study session where we're going to talk about police, public works, debt, and capital planning. That leaves the October 4th council meeting when I will come back and we will kind of talk about what we've proposed to have as changes. We've talked about some of the changes to the council department, for example. But at that meeting, I'm probably going to want to bring our assessed value, the annual notice from King County Assessor came yesterday. They are going to be giving us weekly updates on the estimated assessed value, and I think it runs 6 or 8 weeks, and then eventually they give us a certified in February. However, the preliminary assessed value is usually within 98% of what it's going to end up at. So it would be appropriate to talk about what that means for our budget, what that means for the finances of the city as a whole, for the economy. That meeting right there is only an hour long because it comes before a city council meeting. And I'm hopeful that we will be able to press pause. The folks in finance can finalize all the schedules and narratives and really start putting together the final proposed adopted budget book. I'm not sure if all of those adjectives could go together. The final proposed adopted budget book. Once you adopt it, it's final, right? But we would like to have that in your hands, posted on the website. If there are no further changes, then we would be able to do that. For October 18th, there is a study session before that council meeting, and at that council meeting, that's when the first public hearing is for the biennial budget. It would be great to have our budget book, the final one that will be adopted, posted on the website. The second hearing comes on November 1st, and that's when we introduce the ordinance. And then there's a first reading there, second reading there, and that's when we adopt the budget. So one of the things I would like to ask the FedRAC committee is, would it be of interest for me to bring any kind of tutorial information on Washington taxation, how the valuation leads into the levy and how the tax rate is calculated? We're going to have a hearing on November 1st on the property tax levy, so I will, of course, have to give something for the benefit of the public, fairly brief, to be transparent and accountable. But I thought I'd offer, if that's of interest to you. It's always meaningful. I don't know if you have constituents that ask, but if you'll let me know, I'm willing to do that. Otherwise, it feels to me, in all the cities that I've been preparing budgets for, that we are on track. We have a few adjustments that we've been talking about. When I have chance to digest the new assessed valuations, I think we'll be able to have an adjustment to our property tax. I'll have another month's worth of actuals on all of the other revenues, and we'll be able to absorb the changes that we're talking about.
So, thank you, Chair. Do we have an indication of what we think the average property tax increase will be overall, percentage-wise?
They've given me the assessed valuation, and that does allow me to calculate what I think the overall average tax. But as you know, assessed value is capped at 1%. Now, the fact that the valuation has gone up, and we know that the real estate market was extremely hot is not the right adjective. We were seeing a very healthy increase in real estate values in the real estate market. So that information would be good for me. I've only gotten the first estimate, but I can calculate that and bring that. That would be good information for you to be able to tell your constituents.
The other thing, because they'll obviously be wondering, especially the people who pay cash for their
Mhm.
property taxes. Some people just don't notice it, but the people who have their houses paid off and pay cash do notice that.
Right, if their value only goes up 1%, but their value of their property went up, why then they're gonna feel an increase, and that's gonna be
Right.
exactly right.
And I think at that time it'd be always a good thing to talk about the implicit price deflator, because it's always such a confusing terminology, but idea, and a lot of that's based on new construction, which we haven't had a lot of.
Right, the first blush look at new construction is, it's a very small number, similar to last year.
Yeah.
Yep, yep. Be happy to do that.
Thanks.
I have a question.
I had two questions. This is from many slides back. I didn't interrupt, but you showed one slide where our revenues were 5.5% up, and it was 2.29 million. If you, is that?
Was that sales tax?
Back in your presentation, I didn't interrupt.
Yep, yep.
You go back the slide, and it showed revenues up. I think you had 2.29 million. The first one there where you had the green thing. Sorry I should have interrupted then, but
No, no, no.
on the trend line.
Gosh.
Okay, right there, go up, to this next slide up, right there.
That one.
Okay, general fund, revenue's up 5.53%, and I think it says up on the top that budgeted 41.5 million, we're 2.29 million above. Is that correct?
Total revenues of the whole city are, yep.
So here's my question, and maybe it's already been answered, but, we're in August, we got 60% of our budget, we're gonna come up more, and if we come ahead, is that 2.29 million already spent, or is that gonna be surplus in a sense that we could say, let's not borrow against ourselves to pay for the Target building, we use the money that we collected because it's been a good economy and borrow less from ourselves?
That's a combined total across all of the funds. So
Okay,
some
it's
of the
all
funds
there,
are the
okay.
restricted,
So
yep,
that's
yep.
restricted funds and everything else.
But also, we're forecasting 2 years out, and I think you'll recall that we were looking at the ending fund balances.
Right,
So if
I
it-
understand.
So if it's revenue
Okay.
that comes in, doesn't get spent, we count it.
So that money's already been spent? in the
Cap-
years.
captured on-
Okay.
on our forecast.
And then you had one other graph in there under utility tax. It was
Yes.
the red one where it showed the trend lines. My question was, the trend line showed in the earlier of the year, we were ahead of
Ahead of last
collection,
year.
and then we've dropped down below. So if we're dropping below what the trend line is, does that mean that we're collecting less utility tax, and that's something we should be aware of?
Yeah, well, we should definitely be paying attention, and that's an accumulation of several of our utility
I know it's a
taxes
lot of
combined.
utility taxes,
Right.
it's garbage, it's heat, it's electricity, it's gas, but
Yeah.
you look at that trend line, and we were ahead for the first 6 months,
Mm-hmm.
and now we've dropped below that.
I can't explain it. Part of it is seasonal. If it's, heating and gas utilities,
Right.
then the timing of that's gonna change, so.
Okay, so it's just a timing thing, it's not a red flag yet.
I think so. We know that, because we know rates when they change, the rest is volumes, and we're not a growing community, it's a stable community, so we just need to be paying attention to
Okay.
it
So
monthly.
we just have to watch it, because we don't want to get surprised, right?
I think so. You're paying it, you're keeping an eye on me.
Okay, thank you.
That's how this works.
Okay, so this is regarding the budget sessions and our timeline. So what date are you anticipating we will receive the budget? I didn't write that down. So the actual itemized thick book that we can study, what date will we be receiving that?
The mayor's budget contains every fund.
Right.
Yeah, October 18th is when I want to get it.
And then, we're gonna be getting that October 18th, and then how long are we going to have to study that before we go into discussions? We're gonna get 1 week?
And let me back up just a sec, because we are going to start sending out, I think we've got 3 sections already done, and we're going to email those to you. However, at the policy level, I really want to assure you that you have what you need. The details that you're looking for, if it's staffing, those are on the FTE page. If it's on revenue, you've got those on the revenue pages.
It's very generalized, Steve. I mean, I'm not, 5 line items for an entire department is not, that's not accurate to me. It's not giving me the information that I want to see, and I just want to know what's going on, and I don't feel like I do. I mean, I run a business that makes $1 million or so a year, and I have more line items than that. So I'm just saying, like, I just feel like if we get a book that's this thick a week before we're having hearings, I don't think that's going to give me enough time as a human being who has a life outside of here to study it. So are we only going to get about a week? Because that's what I was seeing.
And I'm absolutely serious. I was trying to distill what you as a governing body needed. You absolutely needed to know the essence of every department, every revenue, and that's in the book that you already have. We will get you how do I describe this? The budget by fund you don't have, but you have the budget by department. So you're going to get the same exact thing sliced differently. I don't know that that's going to tell you anything different. What it will do is it'll be very transparent how we're accounting.
There's that word. I was waiting for you to say that. So you say it like 5 or 6 times every meeting. So in complete transparency, are we going to get a transparent document where we can look through it and say, oh, they're going to spend $7,000 on McDonald's cookies over the year, or, you know what I mean? I just want to see exactly what the expenditures are.
No, we don't.
So we can ask questions.
We don't see any reason to give City Council a line item budget. You can ask for any department and we will give it to you, but we do not put that in our published budget book. No city does. But I tell you the truth, that we are trying very hard to make sure that you have exactly what you do need, and we're being absolutely open. A lot of the departments, when you think about it, police is mostly staff, salaries and benefits, and salaries and benefits are increasing according to step schedules. Same is true for most of our departments. We're not going to give you an employee-by-employee listing.
That's not what I was asking.
Yeah.
I just felt like it didn't give me very much information, and I'm getting emails and phone calls, and people are asking me specific questions, and I can't answer that because I don't have information for them, because I don't have the information. It's just questions about, what's going on with this department, what's going on with such and such, and I can't answer because I don't know. I can say, generally, it's this much, I've got this, and this, and yes, I understand that, a great majority of every department is going to be staff.
Yeah.
I get that. But I'm just saying, like, I just feel like what the city council was provided at the last budget session is different than what we're being presented with right now. And it's kind of minuscule. And so that's what we're gonna get.
I was so proud of being concise. Now, in each of the department pages in your book, there are a couple lines that talk about additions or highlights of what's different. And that is what the departments are getting in addition to last year. We don't do zero-based budgeting because we have obligations with streets, we have contracts, so every budget is virtually the same as last biennium, except for what's different.
There's a line that shows what the increase is and what it's for.
So we want to be very clear on what's different, and then on page 27, we showed you some of the budget requests that are in and the budget requests are out, so that and then each of the department presentations, that's where we wanted the department to be able to speak in detail in what they're doing and what they're not doing.
And that's the presentations that they were giving us, the PowerPoint presentations, those are the details?
For example, last night with Parks. He covered a lot of territory, right? He covered
Not really.
Parks, facilities, Dumas Bay, Community Center, the PAC.
He didn't talk about, okay, all right, I guess I was
Steve,
expecting something different. Thank you.
I think, if I may, I think I understand what Councilmember Norton is asking, because for the last many, many years, during the budget year, the council received the book of this thick. I mean, it's very, very detailed. I mean, talking about 400 pages in there. Versus this year, a little bit different. We have about, what, 50 pages long? I think that's.
79.
Okay, 79. So that's what Erica was trying to tell you.
Right.
Well, like, for instance, may I add something? I sent an email last night asking about the budgets for economic development, city clerk, human resources, because, and emergency operations, because I realize they're under the mayor's office, but they each have their own budget. And Brian Davis responded today to say that they were on page 34, but the information I have on page 34 isn't all the information I want.
And in the mayor's office, there's a line that shows which staff positions are being added, and that's it for the mayor's office, which includes all of those sub-departments, absolutely.
So I'm getting a little confused. Are we going to get a bigger budget book when this is completed on the 18th?
Yeah. In order for us to submit our budget for peer review, we need to have budgets not only by departments, but we have to have by fund. We have to have a glossary, and we have to have acronyms, and we'll add those. Come to think of it, putting a glossary with word definitions would have been a helpful thing too.
So I guess the question really is, how is this going to be different from years past? The budget book in completed, how will it be different from years past?
It will be largely the same. We've expanded the budget message. Last year's was only 4. This year, we made it 10. There were, in the section for long-term budgeting, there's some projections that are for the out years beyond the biennium, and we'll include those. What I hear you saying is you're wondering what I'm not showing you, and I'm trying very hard to tell you exactly everything.
Well, I guess some of the members, our concern is, you know, in the past, we have much more detail with the 400, 500 pages budget book versus 79. So I guess we just want more detailed information, and that's what I'm hearing.
I think, so what I would expand on that is, oftentimes when we're in a FedRAC meeting and a department is going to buy something and they want our approval, they'll say it was approved in the budget. I'd like to see what those things are.
And what it'll tell you is it'll give you either by department or by fund what's in service contracts or professional fees, but it's not going to list each of the contracts or each of the services. I think we're still going to be relying on the departments to tell us. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, so let's say they want to buy, let's say Public Works wants to buy some kind of a truck that's $1.5 million. I would like to see that before I vote on it.
Oh,
on
and
the
I
budget.
would, and I'm not sure if we have a vehicle schedule that shows our perpetual replacement vehicle by vehicle, and I would love to create that. That would actually be an increase in something that we haven't had in the past.
Maybe.
Can I maybe make a
Sure.
comment that might make it a little easier? In the past, we used to get a budget, like we've all heard, it was in a 3-ring binder, and it was this thick. And it said, XYZ department, community development's gonna send 3 people to the conference in Tennessee, and it's gonna be $7,322. So what we have, and it was very specific what that part of the budget was. Now we have a compilation of a budget, which is, you know, a lot of money, and it says we're gonna have payroll of this number, and we're gonna have services of this number. And the services are, it just says services, let's use for example, I don't have my book here, but it doesn't say under those services, we're gonna send 2 people to Tennessee, we're gonna send 7 people to go get milk at the place in Wisconsin, so we don't have the detail of what that is. I think that's what,
That's not what I'm asking.
well, that's
though.
that's
Okay.
what I'm used to.
That's what
Okay.
I'm asking,
Yeah.
is what you're asking,
Yeah,
what you're
so,
saying, Jack.
instead of the compilation of, the payroll's the payroll.
Yeah.
But it's the discretionary things that the department is spending their money on. It may be the plotters, or it may be whatever's in budget. We don't know what that, I don't know what that is, other than I
Sure.
trust that we aren't hiding anything, and I know that.
Sure, and
being transparent, but the detail of what makes up
Yeah.
that 36,000 or $1 million isn't there.
And I hesitate to say you're going to get the exact same thing, because I don't want you to get useless information that you don't need, but I do want you to get the detail that you have. So if the departments have given us that detail, then I think I think that's largely because I have tried to change very little about what we're asking departments for. The timing of it has been
And
perhaps what.
Steve, maybe it might be helpful just to clarify a little bit. A lot of what you guys are talking about is handled with purchasing policies. So the overall budget has what each department planned on spending, and if everything goes to plan, that's what we'll do. But if they want to spend anything over $20,000, they have to come to council specifically on that item and get permission to spend the money. So appropriations and then approval to spend the money. It's 2 separate. There's budgeting and then authority to spend. So the actual supervision is later in the process usually. It's when we come back and say, hey, can we actually spend the money that we budgeted? But we've never done a line item, and maybe that's something to explore at a certain threshold, but below $20,000, it gets into the weeds pretty quick.
I thought it used to be line item. I got books at home that are this thick with every line item that we ever did in
And
the city.
I shouldn't say
But maybe we
never
changed.
in my minimal, 10 years experience.
Well, it's been 12 years since I saw one, so.
And if we kind of use the Pareto principle,
year was
the
by
80,
fund.
the 80-20 rule, if there's certain areas that you would like to see line item, I mean, we can produce right now line item detail. We don't put it in our published public book, but we can get it for the meetings or for your own review. And if you're getting phone calls or emails from constituents with specific questions, forward them. I'll get you the answer.
So maybe I could move that we,
I have a
so
question.
we had discussions on this, but why don't we move the agenda item to the consent?
I have a question on the agenda item, though. On property tax, Steve?
Yes.
Does King County send us a list of who hasn't paid property tax?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
On property tax, does King County send us a list of folks who haven't
Of
paid?
the delinquent accounts?
Right, so that we know how much that we eventually will get, but how much because we plan our budget on property tax. So if, let's say we're going into a recession, and that's the one thing that some folks can't keep up with.
Sure.
Eventually, we will get it if the property is sold or whatever. But do we get a list of what we're missing?
I think they make it available. However, in a city of 100,000, I think that's a statistically large enough number where we can look at what we're currently collecting, and that's why I'm tracking it every month to see. And our collection percentage has been historically high, even through 2020, which would have been the year we would have been most concerned about.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks.
Great question.
I'd like to move adoption of the items.
July and August.
Excuse me, what? Yeah, I want to move it forward to the consent agenda, but I was looking at the
And
item.
just to clarify, these are items H and I.
H and I. I'd like to move item H and I to the consent agenda for approval.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to move forward the monthly financial report for July and August 2022 to the consent agenda. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. The matter passed 3-0. That's conclude our, all of the items on our agenda. Is there anything else council members would like to discuss? The budget book and none? Okay, So our next meeting going to be at 5 p.m. on October 25th, 2022, in this room. The meeting is now concluded. Thank you.
Thank you, good night.
Good night, Lydia.
Good night, Lydia.
Bye.